Hi everyone, welcome back to Let's Do Bonsai. As you'll see, we've come outside to do a bit of a video and we've gone very overcast. There's thunder, there's probably going to be a bit of lightning, so we'll wait for it to pass and then we'll carry on with today's work, which is creating a moss garden. Thunder. It's going to rain big time. Right, okay, we're back at last. The sun is sort of out behind the clouds up there, and the rain's gone away. The garden looks like it thoroughly enjoyed its quick feed from the rainwater. But we're back out here with the moss, and it's time to get on with making our moss garden. If you're anything like me, I go out, I collect moss, and I get some nice moss, velvety, good stuff. And I start using it, and before I get the chance to use it, it dies off, and you know, I've got nowhere to keep it good and keep it well. So let's create a moss garden and keep it living and keep it strong. Where I collected this moss from, it was a nice damp area in a bit of shade. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a simulated garden in this handy little box. That's what they call them here, handy little boxes, and I think some people call them tote boxes and things like that. And what we do is we create this in layers, but we'll get into that right now. So the first layer that we're going to put in is our drainage layer. So this is going to have some larger rocks on the bottom with some smaller rocks across the top before we put our mesh layer in. For the drainage layer, I'm going to use some lava rock. I keep buying lava rock and it keeps being advertised as 2 to 4 mil thick, or width or diameters, and I think you'll agree with me that is not 2 to 4, that's more like 20 to 40. So we'll get a layer of that in the bottom, because I'm not going to be able to use it anywhere else. And I will just see if I take my hammer here, if I can just in my hand break it up. No, I'm not going to be able to do that easily. Need something a bit more substantial, rock on rock maybe. Maybe not best doing it in my hands, to be fair. No. So we'll just stick with the large pieces for the base layer. All of our lava rock in there now, and then we'll smooth that off with some smaller rock across the top. So I've got some small pebbles. may just need just a little bit more to help create that smooth level at the top. So I've run out of those little pebbles, but what I do have is a bag of horticultural alpine gold, the horticulturalist choice. I'm getting lots of these handy little bags, the Chelsea Garden range, and they're absolutely brilliant. They're ideal for getting some potting soil together, and they make ideal soil layers for succulents. So that's our drainage level just about in place. These stones are probably a little bit too fine now really for the top. It's probably made it a little bit too compacted, but it will drain through nicely, and there is obviously lots of big space in the lava rock, so it will go through these small stones. Quick cup of tea. Our next layer to put is a screen layer, and what I've got for this is an insect window screen, so only £2, and you can cut it to size. So we'll just have a look and see where it fills, and it'll be more than big enough, and we'll cut it to the right size. Yeah, there's absolutely loads there. So what we'll do is we'll try and be clever, and we'll shape it to the tote, and what I'm going to do is put the lid on and then cut round it. So if I position the netting so it's just in one corner there, I can grab the lid hopefully and push that into position, and then that will allow me to easily cut around that. It will be slightly oversized for the inside, but that's okay because it will go up the sides and stop any of the soil layer that we're going to put in, that we're going to be planting our moss on. So plenty of drainage screen there left for future, and our screen is here ready to put in place. I think I might just give it one last final trim because it is quite excessive. I'll cut down it's got some lines on it fortunately, so I'll cut down the third line. No point in having very excessive amounts. It's okay it rising up ever so slightly up the sides, but there's absolutely no point in fighting it for longer than we have to as we're in the box. Just put the scissors down. Now if we just push this into position, that gives us a bit up the sides and plenty up the top, so I'm going to have to just lose a couple of inch off the end. The other way to have done this would have been to place the box on the floor with the net underneath and cut round, and we would have got a better shape. A little trick here that I've learned is cut into the corners, not cut corners but cut into the corners at a diagonal, and then that'll allow the corners to go into place. So we just get the corner and just cut into it like that, and then when we place our screen level in, those corners fall nicely and it's not too much of a battle to get the netting to stay where we want it. So that's staying there quite nicely. What we're going to want now is a substrate level putting on there. So we're going to make that right now. I'm not going to use my normal bonsai soil mix. I think that'll be a bit of a waste for this. So we're just going to use some, I think I've got some core that we'll add some water to and mix it up. 2 blocks should do it. It takes 2 to 3 litres of water to make up. So we'll use rainwater for that. And we'll get that mixed now. So that was a close one. We don't want to put the soil level on just yet. We want a layer now of charcoal. Now, ideally you would use active charcoal like you would get for an aquarium, or you can use block charcoal that you would get for firewood, etc. I've got some briquettes here that you would put on a barbecue, but I'm sure that these will do just fine. And what we'll do is we'll get them into place and we'll break them up with the hammer that we tried to stupidly break the lava rock with earlier on, and we'll have a bit of better success here breaking the charcoal up, and we'll just break that into smaller pieces to put on. So I'll get on with that, get the layer on, and then we'll come back. Now we have a layer of charcoal in there that we nearly forgot, or I nearly forgot anyway. That's going to give our good layer between the soil and the drainage to do its thing. So now let's prepare the substrate level. So for our substrate level, I have a cocoa block which we can unwrap and drop into the bucket, and these take 2 to 3 litres of water to swell up and mix up and become nice. So I've got this nice big bottle of rainwater from the rain that we've just had, and I'm going to pour that into the bucket, and then we can mix it up and see how much that gives us for the level, or do we need to use the second briquette that I've got. If so, we'll just do exactly the same for the second brick and go with that. You can see it's swelling up nicely in there. You see it growing as it absorbs the water, the moisture, and that'll all swell up and break up, ready for use as our substrate level. So we'll just mix that up. I think we could probably put a bit more, I think we could probably put a bit more water in there, but it'll be interesting to see just how much this one bucket will give us for that level. So we'll just mix it up. And I'm going to go and get some more water. So I'm back from our water barrels, and I'll just sprinkle a bit of extra moisture into the bits of the brick that didn't get any. And you can hear it soaking it all up, cricking and crackling away. And we've pretty much ended up with a full bucket of soil from that one brick, and there's still a lot of damp points in there. This will probably take maybe 4 litres of water to get this fully rehydrated. And looking at our box down there, it will be a bit of a stretch to put two lots of these in. So let's just put a little bit more water in. There's no fear about putting too much in, because it's obviously going to drain down in through our new system that we've created there, through the charcoal, through our mesh screen, into our drainage layer, and then when the lid's on, it will condensate back up to the top, drip back down onto the top of the soil, and make its own little ecosystem. Hopefully that's the plan anyway. If you were doing this for a living habitat, we'd probably be okay with this soil, but if you were using soil, say just out of the garden, standard soil, you would have to bake that for about 30 to 45 minutes in the oven, just to kill off anything that's living in there, any parasites, any germs, etc. Because it's the same kind of process that you would use for an aquarium, really, or you know, to grow the moss or plants for a vivarium or an aquarium type thing. Don't, you know, quote me fully on it, but I'm no expert, but it's the same general process. So that's all nicely mixed up, and we've got a nice big bucket full of substrate soil. Let's bring up, don't go with anything bigger than this because this is quite heavy now, so we'll bring that back up and into position, and then we'll just pour the soil, our substrate soil, over the top of the charcoal, and it looks like one brick is going to be just about enough. We probably will need a little bit more, possibly. I don't know, there is still quite a bit in the bottom of the bucket, so we'll see what this gives us. I do have some potting mix that I could lay across the top as well, to save trying to put a full new brick on, but having said that, the layer of this is quite thin anyway, so seeing as we've got the brick, we may as well make up another one if this isn't going to fully cover. We'll smooth it out, see where we've got to, and I'm absolutely filthy. By the way, it's 4th of July, so to all you that celebrate 4th of July, happy 4th of July from here in the UK. I know what it resembles to some people, and might be a bit strange coming from a Brit wishing you a happy 4th of July with what's behind it, but happy 4th of July. I think that's not too bad, and when we've got the moss on top, it will do its thing. So the idea is, normally you would put lots of little bits of moss in there and it would slowly propagate and grow, but I've got slabs and slabs of moss here, which we're just going to make sure that they're firmly placed into this soil, and hopefully it will grow into it and carry on growing well. So they've been in these trays and I've been soaking them to keep them as alive as possible, and if we just take out some of the foreign bodies that are in there, there's some stones and pebbles and all sorts that are connected at the bottom, the silt that it was growing on. Normally what you do is you'd have this in water and do like a rubbing motion and take all that silt and rubbish away, and this moss is like the type of moss that builds up and builds up and builds up. I do know what they call it, but it's escaped me as I'm talking to you. There's a feather there in the middle, so If we can get out as much as we can, that's going to be good. But it's nice and wet, it's been soaking away. I'll take out as much of the roughage as possible, and then we can get that pushed down and into the soil, and that should carry on growing nicely in there. We'll put we'll just put this in. Lots of debris where it was picked up from, so we'll just get as much of that away as possible. The silt, it's ideal to get as much of that away as we can. That rubbing motion across the ribs of these chambers are quite good to get rid of most of it, and then we can push it down and into the soil. This is good, thick, velvety moss, clump style moss I believe it is, now it's come to me, where I think Nigel Saunders has got some of that in the Avatar Grove, where it grows up in the back and it's created like little bushes and things in the back. I'm sure that's his, he would refer to that as his clump style moss, but you can see underneath this blanket of moss there's like a silt layer that it's full of the moss's roots, so you kind of want to get some of it away, but you don't want to be losing too much of the rootage. But if you get rid of bits of plastic and any foreign bodies, you can then push the remaining moss down and into the soil, and the moisture that's in there will help it grow, and any dead spaces will probably just fill in with the moss. We will do an experiment going forward where we'll get some various different types of mosses, and I've seen it where you chop the moss up into lots of little bits and you mix it into some rooting compound or some feed, you know, a concentrated feed into a bit of a paste, and you just spread it around on top of the soil. That'll be very interesting to do, and I do have the option for so you can see where they've rooted out of the soil, and all that is moss roots. So when you've got the moss gutted, absolutely gutted. I've been stood here planting moss, rabbiting away, talking you through the whole process. We've planted up 3 of these trays of moss into our moss garden, and I looked at the camera and it was dead, and the last thing that was on the camera was putting the soil in the tub. You've not seen any moss, you've not seen any conversation, nothing. I've quickly run in and put the unit on charge to put as much power into it as possible, and then I've noticed the storm clouds are rolling back in again. It gave me an opportunity just to clear some of the moss up a little bit. I've been picking the weeds out, but part of what I was telling you that you wouldn't have heard was I collect this moss, and I'm trying to re-simulate the same you know, position that it was found in, but obviously you need to get rid of all the foreign bodies etc. that are inside the soil. So if I just show you from the trays that we've already done, you'll see there's some of the silt and thick roots at the bottom of some. There's a great big stone that was in the middle of one of them, and we had a little bit of a joke about moss over rock, which now makes no sense, but it was, I thought it was quite funny at the time. So our moss over rock joke, which was part of one of these. There's lots of bits of debris in here. There's a fire door break glass tube. There's a bit of metal there that somebody's ripped off of something, and then bits of flaky paint and all sorts. You need to get all this stuff out of your of the bottom of your moss. You can see there's lots of stones and pebbles and bits of paint again and all sorts. So that's what we're doing. We soak it in water, rainwater, because as I was saying, as I was planting the moss, moss doesn't like tap water. If you go using tap water for your moss, you're going to probably kill it. It can survive, but it will more than likely die if we use chlorinated tap water. You'll see, you know, we watch certain YouTubers watering their trees and the moss is growing automatically and lovely, and everybody's like, what's the secret, what's the secret? Well, care and, you know, all the rest of it that goes into looking after those trees is a big point, but also not using chlorinated tap water. You'll hear several people talk and say, you know, don't use tap water if you can help it. Always try and use rainwater, and then if you have to use tap water, I have in the past, let it stand on the side for a good 5 minutes or so, and get rid of, let the chlorine evaporate out as much as possible. You'll see here, look, all this silt that's at the bottom of the moss. I'm just picking that thick layer off the bottom and disposing of that into this tray to retain the moss but get rid of that thick silt level that we don't want. It's obviously what it was growing in, and there are some roots in there, but soaking it in the water helps you just rub those particles away and get rid of them, and it does a really good job of breaking up that silt mess, and you can just literally rinse it off basically. So we've got a lot of weeds in that bit, so we'll put that bit over to one corner, and I'll have to come into that with my tweezers shortly. There's a big chunk of silt there, really. We'll just get rid of that altogether. This moss isn't the best moss, but it's like I was talking about this one at the back here, it's like a clump style moss, and it's the type of moss that such as Nigel Saunders would have in his Avatar Grove, and it just keeps growing and building up, and you can make it into a bush. So if you're able to get some of that, then that's really good, because you can shape it and let it grow, but it will, you know, underneath it will be that silty mess. The rain's beginning to drop, but we'll persevere. So we'll just get rid of the the silt off the bottom of this. Absolutely gutted that I didn't notice that the camera was running low. I had no beeps from it or anything, it just died. So it must have literally thought it had power and it hadn't, and then it just gave up. So we'll just put that in and pull out the foreign bodies. Any foreign bits that are in there we need to get rid of. Give it a good rub and a scrape. It will free up the roots, and with it being wet, they shouldn't cause too much of a problem, but there'll be lots of bits of stones and debris in there. So depending where you got it from, make sure that you get rid of what could be around it. So this was from an industrial area, so there's bits of metal and stones and chippings and all sorts of things going on. So we've just got one more bit of moss here that I can just take the bottom off. There is some weed in there, some little bits of flaky paint and all sorts, and what we'll do is we'll put it in, see how it goes over the next few days, and if it doesn't look too good, we'll lift it out and put a better piece in. That we'll go and find some more. I have actually spied some more, but I'm refusing to go and pick it up because I want to create these moss gardens first. What I was saying as well when the battery had gone was we will do some experiments with the moss, and that's we will get various different types of moss and chop it up and put it into some feed and create a bit of a paste, and then put it on top of the soil layer that we had, and that should create the spores to be able to grow. So what I would need to do now is come in with my tweezers and just pick out all these bits of weed. But the rain, I can feel it, little spits coming on my back, and I've got one more tray over there with a nice big clump piece that would be ideal to be get into position as soon as possible. I'll grab that tray now. So this, you can see there's remnants of bits of flaky paint and all sorts where it's come free, and ideally you'd be scraping it all off and taking out as much moss and bits of flaky paint before you even put it into your moss garden. I mean, look at the root that comes on these weeds that grow out of the moss. The moss itself grows some fierce roots, and it's, you know, the silt layer that I'm taking off is absolutely rammed with the moss roots. But as long as we keep the top layer, we should be good. So yeah, I'm really disappointed that the camera failed, but it failed for a reason. I must have been boring you all. Quite possible. So there's a big clump here. We'll just take the bottom of it away. It has grown nice and tall and nice, similar to like a, maybe not as green at the moment, but it was when I picked it. It was a nice big ridged clump like that, which, you know, would look nice in an old grove type setting. But we'll take all the silty bit away from the bottom and push this moss firmly into our soil, and it should generate some nice roots and carry on growing nicely. As I've said, but you wouldn't have got it, don't be scared to push the moss down into the soil. You'll not hurt it, and it will spring up, you know, it'll aerate again and spring back into position. There's lots of bits of moss in that, but I'm just going to let that go. There's some nice bits there, but they're all at the bottom, and the way that this has grown now, where I haven't done this moss garden quick enough, we've got lots of bits that just need to come off, and it can be sat on our new fresh soil and hopefully carry on growing nicely. So what we'll do is we'll get it into play, get it into position, and we'll come back regular to see how the moss is doing. The gaps that we see, the moss will spread and go across those gaps as well, so it'll be interesting to see how it comes back and how it, you know, gets its strength back and gives us some nice new moss to go with. There's lots of silt at the bottom of this. Normally rubbing it on this ribbed part would help break all that away, but I'm trying to do this as quick as possible because that rain's going to come, the video is going to end, and I shall be just going in and editing the video. Right, we'll break this up, this clump, and we'll just fill in some of the spaces and gaps that are in. And again, we don't want to be worried too much pushing the moss down into the soil. It'll find its path, find its rooting, and it will do a good job hopefully. We've got bird feathers and all sorts in this. So try not to use tap water. If you do, make sure you let it stand for a good while to let as much of that chlorine evaporate out. But try and catch some rainwater or use some purified water if you can. Nice clean water. You don't want to be hitting moss with with chemicals and treated water. So that's our moss garden. We've had to speed it up at the end due to the camera failure and trying to get some information in all in one go, but the rain's coming, it's going dark. We'll give this a water, put the lid on, and we'll revisit it in a couple of days and see how we're going. So we'll just give it a water. This will all drain straight through into the bottom, into our area that we've created down there, the drainage area, and then with the lid on it'll work its way back up and create its own little moisture and eco zone, and we'll keep, you know, coming to it and spraying the moss with a sprayer just to you know, keep it looking good and keep it well, and hopefully this will work nicely. And then when we've got some trees to do, we can come to our moss garden, take the moss and put it into our next planting. So until the next experiment of this, and until the next video, I'm Scott Winard, this is Let's Do Bonsai. Have a great rest of your day, make the most of it, make the best of the rest of your day. If you go outside, be kind to each other, others and the planet, animals as well, and as usual, we'll see you again on the next one.